Welcome to Islamic Perspectives on Prison Abolition, a conversation on Islam, justice, and the carceral state. Believers Bailout is a community-led effort to bail out Muslims in pretrial incarceration and ICE custody as a form of zakat, and to raise awareness within Muslim communities on the injustices of the bail bond system, immigration bonds, and the broader industrial complex from which they form a part. Our guests today are Shaykh Azhar Nasser and Ustadh Ubaydullah Evans. Shaykh Azhar is a graduate of the renowned Islamic seminary in Najaf, Iraq, and he shares that knowledge quite regularly via his Twitter handle at Shaykh Azhar. And Ustadh Ubaydullah Evans is a graduate of the renowned Al-Azhar University and lives on the south side of Chicago with his very lovely wife and family. All right, so let's get started. Me. Sorry, I'm your moderator. I'm Dr. Saad Abdul-Kabir. I serve as the senior editor on Stapolo Square, an online resource on Black Muslims in the United States. And I had the honor of being among the collective individuals and organizations that founded BBO. So, our first question. So, when activists talk about abolition, they do so not just in reference to sort of prisons, but also what we might call the entire carceral imagination, meaning that the way our society responds when people break the law or go against a norm is by punishment, right? Locking them up, giving them high fines, putting them in solitary, right? As opposed to other ways you might respond when someone kind of goes against the rules. So my question to you is, what would you say are the Islamic perspective or perspectives on the best way to address what we might call social transgressions when somebody breaks the rules?
So I'll defer to Shaykh Azhar.
I knew you were going to do that. First of all, assalamu alaikum, everyone. I just wanted to thank Believers Bailout and all of the organizers for holding this session to discuss, really a very relevant topic today because, with the pandemic crisis, the condition of prisoners in prisons is really a humanitarian issue. To answer your question, what's the Islamic perspective on addressing social transgressions? I think we have to step back for a moment and really remind ourselves that Islam is a holistic tradition, and therefore it's going to have a holistic approach to social problems. And what that means is that instead of just looking at the act of the offender, the breaking of the law, we have to ask ourselves, what were the economic factors, the social factors, the family structures that contributed to the breaking of that law. Mm-hmm. When we look at it, environmental factors, was it an issue of a lack of financial resources? Was it an issue of a lack of educational opportunities? Oftentimes people commit crimes when they're desperate. It's an act of desperation. Was it because of a lack of meaningful employment opportunities? Was it because, there's a prejudice against people living in poverty? There's almost like this disdain towards people who live below the poverty line. It's like it's your fault. You're in the situation because, you didn't put in the work. You're a failure. Mm-hmm. Also looking at the social factors, many of these offenders, they lack that support, the family support, that neighborhood support, that community support. We got to talk about lack of leadership in communities, the low value that we place on the well-being of children. I mean, you think about all of the single mothers out there who have to work multiple jobs and can't afford childcare. Who's looking after that child? So there are so many different factors that contribute, that are the root causes for what we call, these social aggressions. If you look at family structures, right, many people, come from broken families. They come from families where they experience, different kinds of abuse. So the Islamic perspective is really to step back and look at the bigger picture. We have to ask ourselves, was this a failure of an individual, or was this the failure of a state? So think about it like this. How do we expect, so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that submit to my authority because I did my part as your Lord, how do we expect human beings to submit to human authority when we don't even provide them with their basic needs?
I have two parts to this question. One, does the concept of blood money or forgiveness that you've introduced here suggest, right, that maybe from within Muslim tradition, right, there are alternatives to death as punishment? And two, in light of the ways in which injustices are embedded, right, in light of the ways in which the state has failed, right, and we're not guided, particularly as Muslims, by our tradition, with the death penalty in particular, could that be considered as un-Islamic, like categorically un-Islamic under these conditions?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. You know, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْقِصَاصُ فِي الْقَتْلِ, that equality has been prescribed for you in cases of killing, in cases of murder. And all traditional articulations of Sharia hold that capital punishment is something that should be averted. In fact, all hudud, all punishments, the Prophet ﷺ, this is not a secondary source. This is not a tertiary source. This is not some medieval legal scholar. The Prophet said, avoid punishing to the extent possible. If there's any shubha, if there's any doubt, avoid punishment categorically. However, the existence of those punishments as extant, they are taken to be deterrents. This is how they are treated. They are taken to be deterrents, that people would refrain from engaging in such crime because they realize that if I engage in said crime, it could cost me my life. I tend to believe that the existence of capital punishment can be an effective deterrent. I understand the logic. However, to my colleague Shaykh Azhar's point, in a situation in which you have gross social inequality, gross economic inequality, gross inequality in vulnerability, there can be no capital punishment. I feel like admitting or allowing capital punishment in that context would be like allowing someone to play with gasoline in a room full of matches. You see, so I do understand the logic of the traditional fuqaha in that the existence of capital punishment is an effective deterrent. However, the application of that punishment, the application of that had in a context anything remotely similar to ours, I think would be un-Islamic and irresponsible.
Shaykh Azhar.
So just to add on to what the Shaykh was saying, so I think when we speak about Sharia law, people often automatically equate Sharia law with criminal law. Sharia law represents the totality of Islamic teachings, the totality of Islamic law, from acts of worship to family law to civil law and so on and so forth. So to equate Sharia law with criminal law is as ridiculous as saying that American law equals criminal law. That's one dimension, that's one aspect of Sharia. Now, the point that I wanted to make here, and I think that the Shaykh has already alluded to this, is that why do we have this insistence on enforcing Islamic criminal law, but we're lax about upholding Islamic values in our community? So if you want to enforce Islamic penal code, you better be sure that Islamic values are being upheld. So for example, if you have an offender, let's say that you have someone who commits theft in our societies today. And let's say that you have someone who's gung-ho about applying the had. And let's say that we're able to substantiate that we've reached the evidentiary threshold. What needs to be done first, say we escalate this to the level of the qadi, the judge. Before we even address the act of the offender, we have to first make sure that we can absolve the state. Meaning that, do we have a welfare system in place? What was the mental condition? What was the mental condition of the offender? Did the offender have needs that should have been met by the state? So only after the state is absolved does the conversation steer to the act of the offender. And even when we talk about the act of the offender, we have to understand that what is under question is the act of the person. So we need to make a distinction between a bad person and a person who committed a bad act. But this all goes back to, Islamic penal code is applicable. And again, there's a very high evidentiary threshold, as we're going to come to discuss. If you want to apply Islamic criminal law, are you upholding Islamic family law? Are you upholding, an Islamic welfare system? Are there mechanisms in place? Are there policies in place that are bridging the gap between the rich and the poor? It goes back to kind of addressing the root causes.
Bismillah. Real quick, I know we're short on time.
Go ahead. No, we got a little bit of time. Go ahead.
But I would say on the whole, and I'm not a scholar of American civil or criminal law, either, but based on some comparative reading, it appears to me that Islamic law is just much less punitive. So if you look at something like, and this, when Western audiences talk about Islamic law, the first thing they talk about, Islamic criminal law, the cutting of hands, right? The cutting of hands. And for them, this makes Islamic law sound like Hammurabi's code or something like that, right? This harsh, repressive, draconian, barbaric. The first thing I learned when I was at Azhar was the difference between sariqa, literally grand larceny, and ikhtilas, pilfering, which is like, a person takes, a little bit here, a little bit there. And one of the conditions to establish sariqa was that the person taking cannot feel in any way that they were entitled to what they were taking. See, if the person, so say I'm working for someone and I feel like I'm underpaid and I feel like I'm being exploited and I steal from the register. If I can establish that, in fact, I am being underpaid and I am being exploited, that is not sariqa, no matter how much I stole from the register. That's called, there was a part of me that felt entitled to what I took. Now, as a black man in America, I don't know what I could steal that I wouldn't feel, no, we built this country.
Right.
I don't know, and we still have not received reparations.
Right.
I don't know what I could take that I might not feel like, I feel like I was entitled to that.
I wonder, what you said just made me, I had a thought, I wonder if the punishment, if the cutting of the hand punishment, if in fact it would have been a deterrent for, all the banks that have stolen from everyone, right?
All of them.
Right.
All of them.
But on a more serious note,